feature match area now for a little bit more magic here from Grand Prix Birmingham. Hello and welcome to round 13 here at Grand Prix Birmingham. It's going to be unlucky for one of these two guys. We have Dalibor Szejko against Matthias Passin, and each of these players at 10 and 2, as previously noted, if they keep winning, things looking great. This loss from here on out, though, will really sting. An unstable island. There's an unstable forest and swamp. Lots of basics in hand for Dalibor here.
I think Dalibor might be on Infect.
Well, we do have the little Infect poison counters next to each of these life totals, so if that is the case, then we will be able to indicate that very clearly. Is that a copy of... I can't quite make it out. There's definitely some interesting cards involved in Dalibor's hand here. Let's see if we can find some deck lists to figure out exactly what it is that we're looking at here.
Yeah, Matthias with a more straightforward list here. He's playing some Grixis Delver variant.
I feel like that might be a food chain in Dalibor Szejko's hand. And actually, looking at the remaining cards that he's drawn off that brainstorm, it seems all the more likely Mistmoon Griffin, a key piece of the puzzle when it comes to getting things going with food chain. The creature that you get to cast from exile. Squee, a new addition in principle to the food chain deck, but not quite as good as... let me get my correct wording on that one. Creatures that can be cast from exile, very, very potent with food chain, because you can exile creatures in order to then draw cards.
Yeah, there you see the food chain already in Dalibor's hand. He's playing what looks like Sultai food chain, so he has access to Fatal Push, a card that could be very valuable here to just get rid of the Pyromancer. And he already has the combo assembled.
Yeah, Miss Hollow Griffin is the creature I was looking for there. The 3/3 flyer for 4 that you can cast from exile, and the way it interacts with food chain, very potent indeed. You can exile a creature to food chain to generate X plus 1 mana from exiling that creature of any color to be cast on creature spells, then recast Miss Hollow Griffin from exile. So essentially you can net yourself infinite colored mana with which to cast creature spells once you have Miss Hollow Griffin and food chain working in concert. And of course, there are lots of ways of getting Miss Hollow Griffin into exile. If you happen to exile it to cast, say, Force of Will, that works out just fine too. You can still cast it from exile and get your chain going there.
Yeah, I mean, actually, now that Squee has been printed in Dominaria, there was some talk about going for basically food chain goblins, where you can combo food chain and Squee for basically the same effect. But it appears that Mist Hollow Griffin is still the weapon of choice for the combo deck.
Now, the other card in Szejko's hand, which is a little bit unusual, might require a little bit of explanation for you guys, is Manipulate Fate. Manipulate Fate, 1 and a blue sorcery from Invasion. Search your library for 3 cards, exile them, then shuffle your library and draw a card. So, in a deck that's running a bunch of copies of your Mist Hollow Griffin, it lets you set up your combo that much more easily while simultaneously drawing a card, getting rid of cards that you ultimately don't really want to draw, because by putting them in exile, you're virtually drawing them anyway.
Yeah, super tutor. But of course, it does require a very specific deck.
All right, Szejko here. At this point, his game plan fully revealed to Matthias Passin.
Yeah, and that's very valuable because Matthias is playing a deck with a lot of permission, and Dalibor smartly doesn't just run out the food chain here. He wants to spend a little bit more time setting up so that when it resolves, if it resolves, he can actually go off with food chain and hopefully make something work.
It actually takes out a copy of Manipulate Fate here, I guess, signaling that he maybe doesn't want to draw too many copies of that card once he's already managed to get creatures into exile.
Yeah, and there's no reason to put multiple Mist Hollow Griffins in exile.
Eternal Scourge, another creature that can be cast from exile. A little bit easier on the mana there, but equally not so reliable to stay in play. And it's kind of interesting to me that one thing that the Food Chain deck can do quite happily is just keep casting creatures. And those creatures become a little bit fiddly to remove with any sense of permanence.
Yeah, you might even just block Insectile Aberration with a Mist Hollow Griffin.
Yeah, why not? As things stand, for now at least, things going Matthias Passin's way. He does have to consider exactly where he wants to deploy his counter magic. Food Chain, the obvious card to get rid of. I guess one question would be, once you've got your Food Chain plus exile creature, shall we say, engine online, what's the big payoff there? How is the Food Chain deck really making the most of this mana? Is it just that it's got a string of creatures that are never going to die?
No, what you want to generate infinite mana and just kill with something like Walking Ballista. That's the general approach. But let's see what if Matthias finds counter magic here, because he is not presenting that fast of a clock to close out the game quickly enough. So if he doesn't have a force of will, most likely, then he could be in trouble. 4 damage a turn is currently not really sufficient. That Fatal Push was quite valuable for Dalibor.
Food Chain, definitely one of the decks that I would describe as a fringe deck in Legacy at present. The addition of Squee to the format did lead a few people to reinvestigate the potency of what can be done with the Mercadian Mask's enchantment.
Yeah, but I think that's not really a serious question. You can tell that Dalibor is happy enough with the cards he can cast from exile. These are just tools, and unless you really want to go back to playing the full Food Chain goblins, with also including Goblin Ringleader, then I don't see a big upside for going for that.
And as Misty Rainforest gets cracked, Dalibor sees a whole host of copies of Force of Will right at the bottom of his deck. He will be shuffling, of course, after this, so they could end up just about anywhere by the time that things turn around. A lot of basic lands here in Shiego's list. I wonder whether or not he, somewhere between his main deck and sideboard, perhaps has a few ways of punishing people for running non-basics there, because it does seem uncharacteristically large amount of basic lands coming into play in these early stages.
Yeah, he's fetching all of them, but it could also just be that he knows his mana is good enough and he wants to play around Wastelands. Even though Matthias hasn't played any Wastelands, he might still be holding them just for when Dalibor exposes a non-basic land.
Now, one card I want to mention here, just as Food Chain is getting cast and indeed resolving here against Matthias Passin, that gets a bit of extra value, specifically in this Food Chain deck, is Deathrite Shaman. Normally, eating creatures from your own graveyard is simply a way of getting a little bit of life, but there are various creatures that Dalibor will very happily take from his graveyard where not a lot can happen with them, stick them in exile where they can get recast and potentially generate value that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And Passin actually just drew the Spell Pierce that he would have needed to get rid of Food Chain last turn. He was also holding a Daze, which Dalibor played around, probably intentionally. I would say most likely intentionally. And now we will see maybe the drawback of having cards like Spell Pierce and Daze. I think Matthias is quite unluckily a little bit away from actually doing anything with his counter magic here.
So here we see Dalibor with as much mana as he would like. There's no mana burn to worry about here. He can only spend that mana on casting creatures, so he cast an extra Mist Hollow Griffin from hand. Eternal Scourge also in play here. So he's at 5 life, but now has as many blockers as he could reasonably want in the short to medium term here. And Matthias Passin, yes, his Gurmag Angler bigger than any one creature on the other side of the battlefield, but double blocks are really not a big issue for Dalibor here.
Yeah, but Dalibor has to somehow survive, and he has to find something to win this game, right? It's not sufficient to have Food Chain and a Mist Hollow Griffin. He needs to now start drawing through his deck. and to find maybe a walking ballista. Unless he finds a way to put enough pressure here on Matthias that he wins that way.
And I guess that all of his creatures functionally end up having pseudo-vigilance if he wants, because they can just attack, then exile themselves to get recast. Baleful Strix here, getting cast using Eternal Scourge, generating a bunch of mana, essentially. And then eventually Baleful Strix gets cast sort of for free, drawing a card here for Shizhou.
Oh, Matthias is even holding a Force of Will now.
Vendilion Click the pickup there for Dalibor. Attack with those Mist Hologriffins. A really interesting deck here because it's achieved most of its combo, and what it's got out of it is creatures that don't really die and some mana,
which is quite powerful, right? Creatures that are effectively indestructible vigilance creatures, and infinite mana for creature spells. That's a lot to work with. I'm a bit surprised that Matthias didn't block a Mist Hologriffin with his Insectal Aberration, though. It's not going to do him any good on offense.
Yeah, this is a tricky old spot here. I mean, if Dalibor had a little bit more life to work with, he could feel far more confident about the situation he finds himself in. Vendilion Click will certainly help with knowing exactly what's coming from the other side of things. It wouldn't surprise me if Dalibor here took a look at Matthias' hand, but ultimately elected not to change any cards, just because unless there's a big threat there, he'd rather just know exactly what's going on. Force of Will ultimately coming down to counter the Vendilion Click here. Just lands left in hand here for Dalibor, who already has plenty of lands in play, plus, you know, the infinite mana for creatures.
Yeah, you would assume that Dalibor is now a heavy favorite to win here. And once again, Matthias just taking the damage. Maybe he has a hope that his Insectal Aberration will get through somehow for damage. It does seem rather unlikely, though.
Yeah, there's a little bit of shortcutting going on here. Each time that a creature gets exiled to Food Chain, it generates X plus 1 mana, where X is the converted mana cost of that creature. And so, in the instances where there are lots of creatures to cast, Dalibor knows that he can keep flickering out the same creature that he can cast from exile and gradually generate the mana that he needs.
Okay, another Ponder. So now 3 cards from Matthias. This is a crucial Ponder.
And ultimately, nothing coming on that Ponder, and Dalibor, without having to find his copy of Walking Ballista in order to close the game out in quick fashion, still able to pick up the win there in Game 1 against Matthias Passin. These players will now go to their sideboards to see whether or not they can tweak things to just improve the potency of their deck just a little bit.
Yeah, and you can see that Mist Hologriffin being a 3/3 flyer is actually quite relevant. You wouldn't want to exchange that for a Scree.
Yeah, more of a decision in principle about the Eternal Scourge, just because that's one that's easier to remove briefly if you wanted to get through for attacks without blocks, but so much easier to cast than Squee in this deck that is principally a bug deck that gets to run the likes of Baleful Strix and Deathrite Shaman, Brainstorm, all those cards that we're familiar with from all sorts of different decks in the format.
No, I'm not surprised that Food Chain is doing quite well. I think it doesn't have the worst matchups here in when you look at how the metagame looks like. It's also a deck that is not really too scared of playing against Deathrite Shaman. Of course, it's still a powerful card, but you don't necessarily have to remove all of them because you have another angle of winning the game. One card I haven't talked about all weekend, but I think is just phenomenal, is Carpet of Flowers. I see it in Dalibor's sideboard. That card is so insanely powerful. I'm actually surprised that you can just play it in even in Legacy. But of course, it's not a card you can main deck because you need you need your opponents to have islands in play.
Yeah, assuming that your opponent does have islands in play, this enchantment for just a single green mana is generating however many islands worth of mana for you of any colour each and every turn, and that one of the axes on which every game of Magic is fought is who has the most resources with which to cast their spells. And Carpet of Flowers, on a very regular basis, almost every land on the other side of the battlefield in Legacy can be an island.
Yeah, and this means that dazes and spell piercers are basically turned off. That's a big difference when it comes to resolving a card like Food Chain.
Yeah, if only the hard counters are going to be relevant, then really against a lot of decks we're talking about literally Force of Will, and Food Chain gets to be a Force of Will deck as well.
Exactly. There was actually, I believe there was a time where Carpet of Flowers, where it was unclear whether it should be able to generate the same amount of mana in both of your main phases.
Oh, wow.
And the way it's now worded is that if you don't get mana with it in your first main phase, then you can do it in your second main phase. If you choose to take the mana in the first main phase, then you don't get to do it again, which makes it a bit fairer.
Just a little bit there. And it's also at the beginning of each of your main phases, that's when you choose. So you have to say, right, I'm going to get my extra 5 mana now, thanks. And then if you don't use it right then and there, you've just not used it. Yeah, really interesting card. One of a number of cards from Saga block that proved to be among the most powerful cards ever printed.
Yeah, this one is of course not on the forefront of your mind when you think of broken Saga cards, but looking at this card text, I think it's a pretty absurd card for a single green.
And only really sees play in Legacy, and even then, kind of on the fringes of Legacy, I would say.
Yep. It just doesn't have a home, basically. If you're playing Elves, you have enough mana yourself. If you're playing something like Grixis Delver or a check pile, you don't want to have these kind of effects in your deck.
As things stand, though, Dalibor Shaijo, he has picked up his first game here against Matthias Pessin with Food Chain. Let's see whether or not he can run it back in Game 2. He's got more of a classic bug control start, Brainstorm plus Deathrite Shaman. A Fatal Push in there, not necessarily something that we see in every list, but certainly has plenty of targets in this Legacy format. Meanwhile, Matthias Passin having to take a mulligan here as we go into Game 2.
Yeah, Fatal Push just really well positioned right now. You're guaranteed to have targets against so many decks. And the amount of Deathrite Shamans we've seen, I think, really warrants Fatal Push as a nice main deck inclusion.
It's funny that for the longest time, Swords to Plowshares felt pretty unassailable as just the de facto one-for-one removal spell of choice, and we've seen very few of them cast at all over the course of this weekend. If you're not playing, like, the reasons to play white are gradually diminishing.
Mm-hmm.
Meanwhile, there are so many interesting reasons to have black mana in your deck.
Absolutely. Now that Stoneforge Mystic's powers is has been diminishing over time, and Swords to Plowshares has viable alternatives.
So the turn 1 Deathrite Shaman there from Shaijo. He's already got Fatal Push in hand, so that at some point he can kill off Delver's Secrets if needed.
Both players with powerful starts here, but we'll have to see how it continues.
Immediately casts this Gitaxian Probe, so we can fully see that there's one more Deathrite Shaman, Manipulate Fate, Brainstorm, Fatal Push, and a couple of lands in hand here for Dalibor.
Notably, there is a fetch land, so Deathrite Shaman can make mana next turn if Dalibor wants that.
A pretty decent hand. Manipulate Fate, if it were Game 1, that's the card that really gives away that there's something unusual going on with that hand. Otherwise, you could very easily imagine that there have been games for Dalibor in this tournament where his opponents have misidentified what his role is in a lot of matchups.
Yeah, although to be fair, he does play a lot of combo cards, so it's quite likely that he will have one of them in hand at any given point in time. You need to play 4 Food Chains in this deck, and then some ways of getting these creatures into exile, or just to find them naturally.
Plenty of land to work with here, and no big surprises to see a fetch land cracked here on this second turn, meaning that Deathrite Shaman able to prove a little bit of an accelerant here.
Yeah, Passin smartly not sacrificing his fetch land to not give Dalibor free mana, and Dalibor seems to be really set on not exposing any non-basics to wasteland if he doesn't have to. I like this.
Yeah, it's one of those things that there are various rules of thumb, heuristics, whatever you want to call them, that people can choose to play with. I mean, one of the ones that sort of comes up a lot is play your creatures after combat unless they have haste. That's something that comes up in almost every format that you might choose to play in. In this instance, Dalibor has elected to have a pretty straightforward heuristic for my mana's good. Let's get basics where we can, because Wasteland is definitely a card that can slow down what he's got going on.
I think Dalibor is making smart moves here, because in the end he knows that Food Chain, while being a 3-mana card, wants to be cast for 4 mana or maybe even 5 mana to play around Daze and or Spell Pierce. So by getting basics early, he just makes it so much more likely that he will reach these amounts of mana. Talking about smart plays, I think Matthias is also has a nice brainstorm timing here. He might be able to use Flusterstorm to protect his Delver, his Insect Elaboration.
Yeah, Flusterstorm, one of those cards that it's good in a counter war, because inevitably that means that a few spells will have been cast. It's good about protecting a spell as you are casting it. When you have to use it as a straight up Force Spike, you might as well be playing Force Spike all the time.
Yeah, Tim, I mean, some games this weekend we've seen where one player was doing what they wanted to do and the other was not really playing their A game. But I think this game, both players are really doing what they want to be doing, and it looks quite impressive. You can see the power level of Legacy in full effect.
So here comes Deathrite Shaman number 2, and that is playing around Daze, because there is still the potential for the first one to get activated for mana. Matthias Passim picks up a copy of Force of Will.
We didn't mention it, but Matthias, of course, also getting the shuffle after the Brainstorm. So basically the perfect turn 1-2 sequence there.
And it's so funny to me how sort of you have this 1-drop, it's a 1-1 that at some point may turn into a 3-2 flyer that just takes 3-point chunks, feels so much larger than 1 or 2 point swings, that on its own, one Delver of Secrets is enough to close out games in a way where if someone were attacking with just a single 2-1, just getting in for a 1-1, it would feel unrealistic that would be a reasonable way to end games. But these Delver decks, they don't need very many threats in play at any one moment to reasonably expect to be able to close out a game.
Yeah, that's true. And also there's it's something that you have to learn as a Magic player, how power and toughness works. Every single point of power that you get in addition is quite the difference, because a 1-1 needs 20 turns to kill somebody, a 3-2 needs 7 turns to kill somebody on its own. So you're getting not really a linear effect, but somehow it's the quotient of 20 that you have to calculate. Just like that's why a Gurmak Angler is such a powerhouse, taking a quarter of your opponent's life out of with every swing.
So now Shizho has a little bit of a choice on his hand. He has mana to work with. He's been diligently playing around Daze thus far, but I don't know how much longer he's realistically going to be able to do that. Leovold, Emissary of Trest, seems like the most abundantly powerful card to get into play here, but he's still going to be getting beaten down if he goes with that route.
Yeah, this Gurmak Angler is really quite tricky now. It's a threat that Dalibor cannot ignore, like Insect Elaboration. Taking 3 each turn while you're developing your mana, preparing your combo, maybe doing some Deathrite shenanigans, that's fine. Taking 8 per turn, that's not.
Yeah, and it may be that we see a creature jump under the zombie fish-shaped bus in this next attack step, just so that Dalibor, at the point that he's able to piece everything together, isn't going to be at too low life total to be able to achieve a whole lot.
Yeah, maybe just jump block with the Deathrite Shaman. It's not great, but you have a Leovold in play. That should hinder Matthias from doing a lot of things he would like to do.
Well, the first thing that Matthias wants to do is attack, and This triple block is not something that I saw coming here.
I thought about it because the power lines up perfectly to deal with a 5/5, but it is extremely ambitious. Like even just without a trick or a response by Matthias, you are losing two of your creatures, one of them being Leovold. No, I would have liked the trump block there. Losing a Deathrite Shaman, and you can do the same thing again next turn if you want, or then trump block with Leovold. I think is the stronger play. Now you're enabling everything that Matthias could be holding.
Yeah, I mean, there's not so much danger of being badly punished mid-combat because, of course, Leovold means that if any of Dalibor's creatures get targeted, there will be some cards drawn. But at the same time, you're throwing away a lot of power all in one go here.
Well, I don't know, Tim. If there's a lightning bolt on Leovold, are you really happy about it? Having thrown both of your Deathrite Shamans under the bus, sure, you get a card out of the deal, but I think that would have been pretty disastrous.
As things stand, this is the line that Dalibor has elected to go with, and it doesn't look like he's going to get too badly punished for it. If you assume that it working out exactly the way it looked on the board is not too badly punished.
No, I think this is looking fine.
So Dalibor here, he got that brainstorm. He now has access to a food chain. We'll see how aggressively he wants to deploy it. Based on what we've seen thus far, it would not surprise me if he built up a little bit of extra capital over the next few turns. Maybe go for a Manipulate Fate. If it gets countered, yes, that's a little annoying, but it's not the end of the world. And if it resolves, then you're drawing a card, you're putting the cards that you want to be in exile, and you can always just start casting Mist Hollow Griffins from exile if you desperately decide that you need to start blocking Insectile Aberration.
I think what you really want is you want to cast that Fatal Push. Just get rid of the last threat that Matthias has available, because if you slow down the game, you can go for exactly that, basically recasting these Griffins from exile. Even gaining some life with the green activation of Deathrite Shaman. I think that was one of the reasons for going for the triple block. Getting 3 creatures in the graveyard does make it a lot harder for Matthias to raise with his Insectile Aberration.
So Manipulate Fate here. Eternal Scourge, Mist Hollow Griffin. Let's see what the third card is to be removed here. I recall when Manipulate Fate first got printed, there being talk of building these toolbox decks that could remove the tools that they didn't need with Manipulate Fate and sort of gradually build themselves up to being the perfect answer to whatever anyone happened to bring. That always felt kind of ambitious to me, but I must admit I do quite like Manipulate Fate in exactly this deck.
Yeah, it does sound a bit ambitious. It is a really nice card, though. Nothing too splashy, but at the same time, quite a weird effect for an uncommon. So I have to say I like it.
It is, for Food Chain, the Entomb of the deck. Sets up a lot of other elements.
It's the quiet speculation of the Food Chain deck.
Ooh, yeah, quiet speculation. There's a deep cut. Fetching up cards with flashback and putting them in the graveyard. Fetching up cards that can be cast from exile and putting them in exile. I like it. So Underground say here, enabling the Fatal Push on that copy of Insectile Aberration in play. Now, if you're Matthias here, do you think about protecting this transformed wizard that you have?
Oh, very much. I think it's your only realistic way to victory. So we saw it on turn 2. We saw the Brainstorm into Flusterstorm interaction. The problem is Matthias doesn't have too many ways to protect his creature that wouldn't be better kept to prevent Food Chain from coming down. I think what we actually might see here is Matthias losing because of the value of Manipulate Fate. Dalibor can just cast Mist Hollow Griffin for the next 2 turns, and how is Matthias going to get through that?
Yeah, it's really interesting. Matthias Passin really feeling the downside of casting Force of Will. It cost him 2 spells in hand, not just the Force of Will itself, having to exile a Spell Pierce. There is a Daze in hand for him at the moment, but for Dalibor here, he's got 2 good options. He can start casting Mist Hollow Griffins from his exile zone. he can also have a bash at getting Food Chain into play. And Carpet of Flowers, you mentioned it as the sideboarding was taking place. This one's going to be a real pain for Matthias Passin here, because now, during each of your main phases, you can add up to X mana of 1 colour to your mana pool, and given that you can pick which main phase it is, cast it in main phase 1, generate mana in main phase 2. Have we got a green ritual on our hands here?
This card is, like I said, it's completely bonkers. And now Matthias might lose this game without Dalibor even resolving Food Chain. Like, it's still probably likely that he will resolve it, but he doesn't really need to.
Food Chain looks to be in play here.
And the only thing that Dalibor has to be aware of is that he needs to play around days, and he has been playing around days the whole game. His whole game plan was built around that.
And Carpet of Flowers giving the extra to go over the top of Spell Pierce, and that enough for Dalibor Shiejo to pick up the 2-0 victory there over Matthias Passin. Very happy to see Food Chain on camera. Not a deck that we'd seen so far at all this weekend. One that received a little bit of talk, but there's something special about actually seeing it in action.
Yeah, beautiful.
Very crisp play as well. You could see that Dalibor had been playing that deck for some time, making some lovely moves there. We'll have some more lovely moves, some more lovely magic for you after this quick break back here from Grand Prix Birmingham. Hello and welcome back to coverage of Grand Prix Birmingham Legacy Edition. I'm Tim Willoughby. This is Simon Gertzen and we are getting towards the end of our day here. It is day 2 of our Legacy GP. We'll have standard coverage for you available on Sunday, the second day of that GP. At the moment they're rocking and rolling their way through their rounds. And meanwhile, we are getting comparatively close to our top 8 here as we look at Legacy. We're going to get a chance to jump across and see a little bit of time walk magic from one of our other matches from this round. Here we have, on the left of our screen, Zan Syed up against Jeremy Charles. Charles revealing Chancellor of the Annex because he is on Reanimator. So the first spell that Zan casts would get force spiked unless, pay the extra 1 if you want to resolve it. And kind of scary prospect for Zan. He's been in the feature match area twice so far this weekend. Those are his only losses. Yeah,
let's hope he's not getting influenced by that too much. But I'm also a bit concerned about this start. Chancellor of the Annex into Entomb, that's a scary turn 1 play.
Yeah, I mean, casting the Entomb right now so that there's less chance of it being able to be stopped by Syed. I mean, could we see Load Spettle, Animate Dead, best of luck?
Lotus Petal Reanimate.
That'd do it too.
You do lose a lot of life though.
And that life pretty important when you're
you called it.
Getting Grizzlebrand. Here's a Lotus Petal. There's a Simian Spirit Guide in hand. Oh, we're going for the Reanimate. Okay, so this is going to cost a lot of life for Jeremy Charles here, but he's got Chancellor of the Annex backup, meaning that there was no opportunity for Zan Syed to do anything there unless he had, the likes of a Spirit Guide in his own hand to help him with even a Force of Will.
I'm pretty sure that's the most powerful turn 1 we've seen all weekend.
I would say so. Jeremy Charles has dropped to just 5 life here in order to draw 7 cards, but I don't know that he's necessarily going to mind too much. He's now got 2 copies of Simian Spirit Guide in hand. There could still be more, Simon.
Yeah, Zan is having the time of his life in the feature match area.
He's never felt this way before. So Jeremy Charles discarding down to 7 cards. Got to be feeling pretty good about himself. He's still got that Chancellor backup going on. Chancellor of the Annex, a reasonable enough creature to reanimate, but on top of that, just meaning that the early terms of the game so difficult for the opponent to navigate.
Zan just passed the turn. He didn't do anything.
I mean, at this point, I think that might be a really smart play. Why give any information away when you're facing such a ridiculous start on the other side of things?
Oh, Zan is saying, you know what? I will hide my deck choice from you. At least you don't get to sideboard as effectively as I will.
Dark Ritual, Entomb.
I mean, this this is a ridiculous beating. Oh, this is also nice. Sire of Insanity to maybe force some discards or at least the concession from your opponent.
Oh dear, poor old Zan. I've been in the feature match area twice. This is my chance to redeem myself. Surely it'll be... Oh no. And that's our game 1. Exhumes out. Chancellor of the Annex. Ugh. A little thumbs up there from Zan, giving nothing away. The look on his face right now, I can't imagine that he's feeling particularly great about this. Oh, also a Sire of Insanity. This is still turn 2, by the way.
Okay, yeah. Jeremy is playing basically an all-in Reanimator list. He's just black-red, Faithless Looting, Simian Spirit Guides, the full package of fast mana, for Unmask to push through his combo. But that was a truly ridiculous opening hand.
You will struggle to find more ridiculous openings in any format. Even in Vintage, the format that in principle is all about these turn 1 kills. That was about as brutal a turn 1 as you're likely to see. So Bloodstained Mire and a Lotus Petal coming down from Jeremy Charles here, who is apparently putting on the brakes after game 1, trying to make sure that we get a little bit more magic on our cameras.
Yeah, and actually Deathrite Shaman, one of the reasons why Reanimator is not as popular as before. The funny thing is that a lot of decks are not actually green, but need a green source in their decks to enable the creature exiling ability of Deathrite Shaman.
Yeah, and that's kind of where we find ourselves here. Zan Syed is on Grixis Delver, meaning that whatever access to green mana he has, comparatively limited.
Yeah, what you can usually assume is that there is a single tropical island hidden somewhere, most likely just in the main deck, so that when you need it, you do have access to the to green mana, but it's not going to be naturally in your opening hand most of the time.
So, all of this end of turn, activate Bloodstained Mire, cast an Entomb. That's met with a Spell Pierce. Now, in principle, there might be a whole bunch of Simian Spirit Guides to get through that, but in this instance, nope, not happening.
No, but maybe also just a backup Entomb.
And you saw there, Jeremy Charles was trying to save time a little bit. The reason he didn't present his deck to be shuffled initially off that Bloodstained Mire is he knew that he was going to be entombing immediately thereafter. Once the Entomb got countered, he did say, all right, now you can shuffle my deck, given that it's not going to get shuffled any other way.
Yeah, it does look like Jeremy Charles is not sitting there with the best hand, though. I saw an Unmask. Didn't have any place. Maybe he has another Entomb. That would be saving grace.
Apparently you can't have it all every time.
Well, and Zan doesn't have green mana yet, but if he drops this Flooded Strand, I think then things will get really, really difficult for Jeremy.
All of the fetch lands in the Grixis Delver list typically fetching blue lands, because that kind of the common denominator between the mana base on Delver.
So here's the question, Tim. If you win game one in the fashion that Jeremy Charles did, you don't know what you're playing against. Do you sideboard as if you're facing a Deathrite Shaman deck?
It's an interesting question. I think that there's probably value in doing so.
Because it's the card you're most scared about, it's the card that's most played in Legacy right now, and you're up a game. So it's just
the downside of getting that question wrong is not especially high.
That's what it feels like to me. I'm not a Reanimator player, but it doesn't happen so often that you don't know what your opponent is playing after game one. But it's an interesting thought experiment.
It's definitely possible that these players have been sat on nearby tables. When you get this late in a GP, it's certainly possible that you can have got a sense of what the metagame of the tables around you looks like. That said, the way that Zan elected to play the game one suggested that, at least from his side, he wasn't sure that Jeremy knew what he was up to.
Of course, and that's the assumption that I was operating under. Maybe you also go for some hybrid approach. You know, you bring in a few cards that you would against Deathrite Shaman or Deathrite Shaman decks, but you don't go all out because it might still be another matchup altogether.
So these Delver of Secrets, not delving too successfully just yet, seeing a land on top there, and Zansayed elects to use his Flooded Strand to beef up his draws potentially here, shuffling before he actually draws his card for the turn.
He's also shuffling before the second Delver trigger resolves, or at least he should be, so that you might still get one of them flipped. There's the tropical island I mentioned.
So from here on out, it becomes trickier to get creatures into play from the graveyard. Now, one thing that Jeremy Charles does have access to in his list is Exhume, which is not a targeted way of getting creatures out of the graveyard. So if you happen to have multiple creatures in the graveyard, then casting Exhume, even if there was a Deathrite Shaman to eat something, he would still be getting a creature out.
No. And Zan is rewarded for his play here. Not only did he get to flip one of the Delvers, he also got a Force of Will. So now he's a little bit more backup against what Charles is trying to do, which could be overloading him with cards like Exhume, but it could also be a removal spell on Deathrite Shaman that you can now counter with Force of Will. Now,
I do wonder, in terms of choices before you even sit down at the tournament for what build of Reanimator is best, this particular option that Jeremy Charles has gone with, it's red-black, which means that it has a better opportunity to have the big explosive early turns with the likes of a Simian Spirit Guide in the mix, but it does have a different disruption base to lists that have access to blue mana. It can't have the counter magic. Additionally, it won't have the same level of deck manipulation, I wouldn't imagine, as one that can run Brainstorm.
Absolutely correct, and I don't have the answer what's the better build or the better choice for the metagame, but I do like this approach of just going all in and saying, let's get one of these game-winning guys onto the battlefield as quickly as possible. Brainstorm is, in essence, it's a late game card. Because you want to be drawing those dead cards and then shuffle them away. You don't really want to search for your combo pieces with it.
So a daze here on Unmask, protecting that Force of Will in hand for Zan Syed. And Zan quite happy to take even comparatively inconsequential looking cards from Jeremy Charles' graveyard if it means that it speeds up the clock he's presenting, because between these 2 copies of Insectile Aberration and Deathrite Shaman here, there's really not much time left for Jeremy Charles to assemble anything here in this game too.
No, and Jeremy is I believe, drawing that here. A Deathrite Shaman that keeps pinging him and that is also preventing his ability to combo. Actually, he's holding Grave Titan, Elish Norn, and a Sphinx of the Steel Wind or something like that. So there was absolutely no chance for him.
So game 3, there is a Chancellor of the Annex in hand for Jeremy Charles. We'll assume that he revealed his hand to mean that his first spell is not counterable here. But just a Lotus Petal on turn 1, no lands.
Yeah, he also mulliganed, so that might have something to do with it. Oh, and now I remember, Zan is the person playing Bomat Courier.
Now, I can already see Craig Jones having a little chat with Zan, and I really hope that one of the questions is, talk me through the inclusion of Bomat Courier. We did see it draw a lot of cards for Zan Syed yesterday, which is certainly something that we all love doing.
Oh, and here you actually saw that Zan values Bomat Courier higher than Deathrite Shaman.
Yep, he chose to play the Deathrite Shaman into that Chancellor of the Annex ability rather than putting the Bomat Courier under that particular bus.
I can't believe it, Tim. This is just too good.
The moment that you pass across your Bomat Courier for someone who's clearly a legacy specialist, you don't end up with that many foil cards in your legacy deck just by accident, so that Jeremy can have a good old read of exactly what's about to attack him. Play some standard, Jeremy. You'd be well familiar with this one.
Yeah. Here you might be thinking they wanted to play Pithing Needle but didn't find the right card, or what is going on? It's just like, okay, get some cards.
I mean, I've definitely had situations where I've been testing. I've put a card in place of the one that I'm really looking for just until I can get hold of copies of it, and then gone, oh, maybe I should just be playing, in this instance, Bomat Courier. All right, Collective Brutality here, discarding Chancellor of the Annex to try and kill off Deathrite Shaman and indeed get a card out of Zan Syed's hand here. Force of Will actually means that there are 2 cards taken out of Zan's hand, but he gets to keep Deathrite Shaman, which I think is probably a trade in favor of Syed here. But here is Reanimate. Do we have any more counter magic from Syed? And I believe that the best that's coming out of this Reanimate is going to be that Chancellor of the Annex.
Yeah, but another really nice play by Jeremy. He motivated Zan to protect his Deathrite Shaman because Zan knows that Deathrite Shaman is, once it's active with green mana, one of the best foils he has. But Jeremy actually had the Reanimate for the same turn. And once again, I'm a little bit questioning whether Zan shouldn't have just exposed the Bomat Courier to the Chancellor trigger and then cast 2 Deathrite Shamans.
Well, as things stand, from now on, every spell that Zan does want to cast can be a little bit more expensive. The first spell of every turn that... whenever an opponent casts a spell, it will get countered unless that player pays 1. So Chancellor of the Annex will mean that everything that Zan has going on now is taxed.
It's a little bit like a Thalia, just
for creatures as well.
Just for all spells and only for your opponent.
And it attacks for 5 in the air.
No, it's a pretty good package.
Yeah, Thalia needs to hit the gym to keep up with the old Chancellor there.
I think you need to oil yourself up in Phyrexian oil or something like that. Gym alone is not going to cut it.
Yeah, the Phyrexian approach to bodybuilding involves literally building a body out of bodybuilding. Polluted Delta here, allowing Zan Syed to potentially cast a spell or 2 this turn.
And probably get a tropical island on the way.
Everyone wants a tropical island, right? What a place to be. I like the suggestion that Volcanic Island might not be tropical for some reason. I guess that Iceland's not particularly tropical, so... Maybe that all checks out.
It's also much better to own a tropical island than a volcanic island.
I mean, you get to cast Deathrite Shaman.
Oh,
Quad
you get to
Demonstrandum.
spend your summer vacations.
All right, so after our little bit of polluted Delta Ring, Zan is just double checking before he starts casting a spell, so he doesn't fall foul of any nonsense with this Chancellor.
What's the card in his hand? Can you make it out?
Can't quite make it out just yet, but I'm sure that he's willing to show us relatively soon here. Each of these players with 2 cards in hand. Rather more permanents available to Zan right now, though it's arguable that the Chancellor of the Annex trumping everything that he has going on.
Oh, for sure. It's really not about creature combat at this point. It's about the Deathrite Shaman disincentivizing Jeremy from going into a race, because racing this Chancellor is quite difficult. Oh, this die is a reminder of the taxing effect of Chancellor.
Yeah, I think it's all the more relevant when you've revealed it at the start of the game, because the reveal option is the first spell of the game gets countered from your opponent unless they play one. So in principle, that can end up sitting around for a number of turns without any visible reminder.
There he is again.
Back once again with the rude behavior. This Bomat Courier swinging in to an unafraid Chancellor of the Annex, and now we see Deathrite Shaman being activated to create red mana so that at least Zan gets to draw a couple of cards on the way out. Discarding an Unground Sea. Didn't need that one anyway, apparently. Quite happy to have it in the graveyard for Deathrite Shaman. Draws another land, and I think that might be a Surgical Extraction there as the other card that's been
I concur, yes. Surgical Extraction may be a bit too late, but could be helpful if Jeremy manages to overload that Deathrite Shaman once again. And Charles is still not over it.
I mean, we do have ourselves a reader here. It's one of those cards that it's, even for us now, having seen it in play across a number of games, it's still a little bit of a head scratcher for Legacy.
And let's be honest, if it hadn't been in Standard and in a very successful Standard deck for a long time, we also would be sitting here and looking up a card like that has that just shouldn't be in Legacy if you look at it, if you look at it from the surface. But I'm also looking forward to what Zan is telling our text coverage reporters.
So we might be about to see a Reanimate targeting a creature in Zan's graveyard.
Which one could it be?
I really hope it's the Bomat Courier.
That's going to be a world's first. No.
Aboo. Deathrite Shaman coming into play from Zan's graveyard for Jeremy Charles. He loses a life for the trouble. But now we have dueling Deathrite Shaman. Unfortunately, that still doesn't really help the Reanimator player overly much. But, I mean, for Jeremy here, at least it means that he has access to a little bit more mana. I would have loved to see a reanimated Bomat Courier there. I mean, Jeremy has access to red mana, and he does kind of like discarding some cards.
Yeah, there are a lot. I mean, maybe he should be playing it himself.
Maybe.
That's what I'm thinking.
It's an interesting one.
Twitch chat is already putting Bowman Courier in every Legacy deck.
I mean, you can cast it in every Legacy deck apart from Manaless Dredge. And even for Manaless Dredge, if they can find a way of making mana, it lets them put all of those dredges in the graveyard. We've solved the format. Okay, in comes young Pyromancer here. Jeremy just takes the damage. Dropping to 9 here. He's potentially going to be going to 8 when he activates that Bloodstained Mire at some point. Flooded Strand here for Zan.
Oh, and Zan has been super successful with his deck list. 10-2 is an amazing record. If he wins here, 2 more rounds to go. That would be not guaranteed to make top 8 by any stretch, but a really good shot at top 8.
Chancellor of the Annex once again swinging in the air.
I do have a feeling that Jeremy is advantaged here. Doesn't seem like what Zan is putting on the battlefield can really raise the Chancellor or deal with it.
I mean, young Pyromancer severely neutered by Chancellor of the Annex being in play, making it so much more expensive to cast additional spells. Dueling Deathrite Shaman. And this is a kind of funny state of affairs because there is this surgical extraction in Sayed's hand, and it required Deathrite Shaman to get tapped before it was going to get used to any positive effect here.
Yeah, there was a weird exchange of sorts because Zan announced Deathrite Shaman activation targeting Reanimate. Jeremy responded with his own activation targeting Reanimate, and now Zan is responding with Surgical on Reanimate, which mostly is there to make an elemental token. I don't think it has much of another effect. So he probably also could have just cast the Surgical Extraction, because if Jeremy responds with Deathrite Shaman, he would also get to make Jeremy lose 2.
And Zan also using a Daze on his own Surgical Extraction here, paying the additional mana that he needed, bouncing a land in order to be able to help him cast it, paying for the Daze on his own Surgical Extraction, again to generate tokens. Ultimately, this Surgical Extraction is going to resolve, I believe.
But he's not... Well, the Chancellor is just going to counter the Daze, right?
Well, no, he returned an island and paid 1 mana to cast Daze, and then paid 1 mana for the Daze.
Yeah, but that doesn't make any sense. The correct play is to let your Daze be countered by the Chancellor.
Oh, I see, yeah.
Otherwise
you don't want it to resolve anyway.
Yeah, otherwise you're just paying 2 mana extra. Doesn't really matter. He just got 2 tokens out of the deal. And he has an active Deathrite activation, so this is the turn to make something happen.
Gets to attack for 4 here.
Jeremy at 5, Zen at 5. Are there even creatures in the graveyard?
Right now, there is a Bomat Courier in the graveyard.
Okay, so potentially you could go up to 7, but 7 is still lethal.
Cabal Therapies here. Coming from Zan. Having to pay 1 for each of these Cabal Therapies on top of everything else.
How do you survive the turn? I don't think you do if you let Jeremy untap.
Yeah, I think that you have to eat that creature before Jeremy untaps with Deathrite Shaman in play.
No, that doesn't really matter, because even if you gain 2, then Jeremy can make you lose 2. So I don't think there's an out for Zan. Jeremy doesn't have green mana, but he has black mana, so just target Cabal Therapy, for example.
Yeah, that enough for the win there for Jeremy Charles. You see a little pump of the fist from him. You know how important it was to get that win for him. And Zan Sayed, unfortunately for him, this feature match area not treating him kindly at all. I mean, that game 1, one of the most brutal turn 1, turn 2s that you're going to see in Magic, full stop.
But that's what you sign up for when you come to a Legacy GP. Honestly, this can happen, and even if you're playing Dazes and even if you're playing Force of Wills, sometimes these kind of starts happen.
And that happened to be the case in this round. That is the end of this round, though. We will have more Magic for you soon enough. Raf and Riley will be back with the next round very shortly indeed. But for now, from Tim Willoughby and from Simon Gertson, it's goodbye for now.